Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 8.2A. I've entitled this video Early History of Brazil. This video is going to cover pages 248 to 252. Early History. In 1493, Christopher Columbus returned to Spain with news of his explorations and of new lands. The Spanish worried that neighboring Portugal, a powerful seafaring rival, would try to claim these lands for itself. So they asked the Pope to find a solution. The Pope decided that all new lands west of a certain line should belong to Spain. Lands east of the line would belong to Portugal. The two countries agreed to this division in 1494 by signing the Treaty of Tordesillas. And as we can see, here's the line that eventually was created. As you know, it's an imaginary line. You can't actually see this on the Earth, but you can actually draw the line. And now we can answer question 1. What famous explorer returned to Spain in 1493 with news of new lands? Christopher Columbus. Question 2. What did the Treaty of Tordesillas do to help keep peace between Portugal and Spain? It created an imaginary line, and it basically said, all right, everything east of this line is going to be Portugal's, and everything west of this line will be Spain's. And as you can see, east of this line is a small portion of Brazil. I mean, it's not small, but it's a segment of Brazil, and that's how Brazil got the Portuguese influence. Almost nothing was known of the region's geography, so neither side realized how unequal the division was. Almost all of the Americas lay west of the line, which became Spanish territory. The only exception was the eastern part of South America, which became Portuguese territory. Today, this part of South America is Brazil. That is why Brazil is the only South American country that has a Portuguese heritage, and you can see that on the picture to the right. Question number 3. Due to the Treaty of Tordesillas, what country was able to claim almost all the land in the Americas? Spain. Question 4. What is the only country in South America that has Portuguese heritage? Brazil. Indigenous populations. The first Portuguese ships stopped in Brazil in 1500. Their destination was India, so they did not stay in Brazil for long. They had peaceful encounters with some of the indigenous or native peoples who lived along the coast. The Portuguese commander, Pedro Cabral, claimed the land for Portugal. After just 10 days, the Portuguese left. They had no idea of the vast region and many peoples included in Cabral's claim. The people the Portuguese met were the Tupi. They lived along the coast and in the rainforest south of the Amazon River, where they grew cassava, corn, sweet potatoes, beans, and peanuts. They hunted fish and other water animals with arrows and harpoons from large log canoes. But they did little hunting on land. Brazil's native peoples had lived there for more than 10,000 years when the Portuguese arrived. Estimates are that the population was between 2 million and 6 million by 1500. Besides the Tupi, it included the Arawak and Carib peoples of the northern Amazon and coast, and the Nambacura in the drier grasslands and highlands. These are not the names of native peoples. They were Brazil's 4 main language groups. Each group comprised many different peoples. And now we can move on to question 5. What does the word indigenous mean? Indigenous means the native peoples that are already there. Indigenous means native people already there. Oh, did I skip one? Hold on a second. Let's go back. Sorry. Question number 6. What did Pedro Cabral do in Brazil in 1500? He claimed the land for Portugal. Question number 7. How long did Brazil's indigenous people live in Brazil before the Portuguese arrived? For more than 10,000 years, they had been living in Brazil. Now we're ready to move on. Daily life. Like the Tupi, Brazil's other lowland and rainforest peoples were mainly farmers. They lived in permanent, self-governing villages and practiced slash-and-burn agriculture. This is a method of farming in forests that involves cutting down trees and burning away underbrush to create fields for growing crops. Farther south, most of the Nambacura of the Brazilian highlands were nomads, people who move from place to place and have no permanent home. In the dry season, they lived as hunter-gatherers, people who get their food by hunting, fishing, and collecting seeds, roots, and other parts of trees and wild plants. In the wet season, they built temporary villages and practiced slash and burn agriculture. And now we can answer question number 8. What is slash and burn agriculture? As the book stated, this is a method of farming in forest that involves cutting down the trees and then burning away the underbrush, and that creates the fields for then growing the crops. Europeans arrive. For more than 30 years after Cabral's visit, the Portuguese did not pay much attention to Brazil. Their main focus was on their colonies and trade in Asia. Their trading ships sailed south and east around Africa on their way to Asia. Portuguese sailors established a few trading posts along Brazil's coast and collected Brazil wood. The red dye extracted from this wood was highly valued in Europe. It was because of this trade that the Portuguese named the region Brazil. The valuable Brazil wood trade made other Europeans more interested in Brazil. French traders began collecting the wood and shipping it to France. To bring Brazil under tighter Portuguese control, Portugal's King John III established a permanent colony and government there. The first Portuguese settlers arrived in 1533. Question number 9. Why did the Portuguese not pay too much attention to Brazil for about 30 years after Cabral's visit? Well, their main focus was on their colonies and trade in Asia. They weren't as focused on what was going on in Brazil. They were more focused on what was going on in Asia. Question number 10. What resource began to make Brazil more valuable to Europeans? The Brazil wood, and from that we get question 11. What's so valuable about Brazil wood? The red dye that they could take from the wood. Back then, because they didn't have the modern ways in which we can make clothes today, and this dye was used to help dye clothing. Colonial rule. Portugal's rule of Brazil lasted more than 300 years. During that time, Portuguese settlements spread all along the coast. Explorers and others traveled up rivers and deep into Brazil's interior. The expansion brought wealth to Portugal, though much of it came at great cost to Brazil's indigenous peoples. Question number 12. For how long did Portugal rule Brazil as a colony? For more than 300 years. Question 13. Why was the story of Portuguese settling of Brazil a story of both good and bad? Well, it was good for Portugal because it brought them great wealth. But the bad part is it came at great cost to the people already living there. As you're going to find out in the next slide, they suffered a lot of horrible conditions due to this desire for wealth. The Portuguese conquest. King John III gave wealthy supporters huge tracts of land in Brazil. These tracts extended west from the coast about 150 miles. In return, the people who received a land grant were responsible for developing it. They founded cities and gave land to colonists to farm. Because the colonists could not do all the work that was required, they soon began enslaving nearby native peoples as laborers. Many of them resisted and were killed. Thousands more died from exposure to European diseases, to which they had no natural resistance. Others fled into Brazil's interior. These conditions and other complaints caused King John to end the land grant system in 1549. He put Brazil under royal control and sent a governor from Portugal to rule the colony. And now we're ready to go to question number 14. How did King John III encourage the Portuguese to settle the colony of Brazil? Well, he gave wealthy supporters huge tracts of land and said, hey, it's your job to basically make this profitable, develop this land, build cities, and make me some money. Make Portugal money. Question 15. Due to the fact that the Portuguese could not do all the work that was needed, what type of labor did they begin to use? They began to use slave labor. Question 16. What were some of the tragic consequences of the Portuguese actions on the indigenous peoples of Brazil? Well, because they started to use slave labor, many of the people said, no, we're not doing it, and they were killed or enslaved. Thousands more died because they were exposed to European diseases from which their bodies had no natural resistances. And others, rather than being killed or enslaved, decided to just flee more into the Brazil's interior, so away from the coast and more into the tropical, rainforest and areas of Brazil that are more away from the coast. Question number, I think we did 16. So we're ready to move on to the next slide. Spread of Christianity. The new governor brought more colonists with him. They included a number of Jesuit Catholic priests who belonged to a missionary group called the Society of Jesus. The king asked the Jesuits to go to Brazil to help the native peoples and convert them to Christianity. Those who converted were settled in special Jesuit villages and were protected from slavery. Those Portuguese colonists who held enslaved people complained to the king about the Jesuits' work. In 1574, he ruled that native peoples who did not live in Jesuit villages could be enslaved only if they were captured in war. This ruling set Jesuits into Brazil's interior to protect and convert peoples there. Slave hunters also moved into the interior to attack and enslave the native peoples. Cattlemen and prospectors followed, slowly spreading development inland. Question 17. How did the Jesuits impact the history of Brazil during that time period? Well, the Jesuits went there to try to convert the native peoples there to the religion of Christianity. And for those that were converted to Christianity, many of those were protected from slavery. And so there was this battle between the Jesuits trying to convert people to Christianity and the slave catchers and slave people trying to turn people into slaves. A battle between, you could argue, good versus evil, for sure. Sugar and gold. As Brazil's sugar industry expanded, cattlemen needed new land. The rise of large sugarcane plantations, mainly in the northeast, pushed ranching westward. In the 1600s, sugar became Brazil's main export and Portugal's greatest source of wealth. Coffee and cotton plantations also developed. The discovery of gold in the eastern highlands in the 1690s further boosted the development of the interior. Towns sprang up as thousands of colonists rushed to the area. Large numbers of new colonists arrived from Europe as well. The discovery of diamonds in the region in the 1720s added to the population boom. Plantation agriculture and mining required large numbers of workers. This increased the need for enslaved workers. When native populations could not fill the need, the Portuguese began importing large numbers of enslaved Africans. By the 1780s, more than 150,000 enslaved Africans worked in the mining districts. This was twice the size of the Portuguese population. By 1820, some 1.1 million enslaved people accounted for nearly 1/3 of Brazil's total population. Question 18. In the 1600s, what became Brazil's main export and Portugal's greatest source of wealth? Sugar/sugarcane. Question 19. Due to the increase in plantations and mines that needed large numbers of workers, what did the Portuguese begin to import to Brazil at that time in history? Well, they ran out of enslaved workers from that area, so they began importing large numbers of enslaved Africans to be slaves in that part of the world. And number 20, by 1820, what accounted for nearly 1/3 of Brazil's total population? Enslaved people. So think about that. Nearly 1/3 of the people in Brazil's population in 1820, that was just a little over 200 years ago, were slaves. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Before you go, I couldn't really find a meme, but I did find this. Did you know Brazil is the only country in the world that is named after a tree? Huh, how about that? Well, thanks again for watching, and have a great day.